Troxler. So I'm here to welcome you to this workshop. We are currently being recorded, just so you're aware of that. And I also want to alert you to the fact that we have two presenters that will be joining us remotely. One co-presenter, Pamela, in the first presentation, and then our fourth presentation, Ifat, will be also joining remotely. We have our third presenter, I believe, Kojo, who is here, welcome, which makes me much more comfortable. Just a quick word, because we already had a plenary panel on resistance. Just hearing some of the thoughts and sentiments expressed across the plenaries this morning just has me thinking about resistance in terms of the assumptions that we make about democracy and democratic practice. And I won't say too much about what I mean by that, but we have assumptions about how, for example, Western democracies ought to be operating and may not be operating in this current time frame. We also have assumptions about democracies and democratic practices in other parts of the world where maybe some of the chaos, confusion, and distraction that we're experiencing in the Western world are things that we might face in a quotidian fashion, right? So I just want us to keep that in mind as we move into this discussion and these presentations. Four fantastic presentations. I will end my introductory remarks there so that we can get into a lively discussion. We're going to have the four presentations. Following that, we will have a bit of reflection with each other as well as questions and answers. And without further ado, Renee and Pamela.
I'm going to come up to the front just to let you know we have a Rise Up notepad that's mentioned on the agenda that you can add to any time. So are you ready, Maya?
I am ready.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to be presenting on participatory AI governance, resistance, and the ladder of citizen participation. I'm Renee Sieber at McGill University, along with my co-authors, Pamela Robinson and Sam Evans, who are at Toronto Metropolitan University. So I'm going to talk about Arnstein's ladder. So Arnstein's ladder of citizen participation in 1969 is considered the most widely cited paper in urban planning. Arnstein envisioned citizen participation as a set of ascending levels of public engagement decision-making. The ladder consists of 8 rungs grouped into 3 categories: non-participation of therapy and manipulation, tokenism of informing and consultation, very popular in Canada, and citizen power, whether that's partnership, delegated power, or the ultimate citizen control. This framework is very appealing because, first of all, it solidifies the importance of the public in decision-making. Second, because importantly, it ties citizen participation to political power. And third, also, Arnstein refers to governance by government, not in the private sector. In AI, the ladder has become a formative part of participatory design. It's popular in domains connected to responsible AI, such as law and computer science. The ladder is also very useful because it's applied as a kind of a checkoff box. Consultation, participation is happening here, and it can be done presumably at scale, for example, with citizen assemblies. Weirdly enough, it is both political and apolitical. It's supposedly neutrally applied, even if the processes and outcomes have impacts with political implications. The latter can serve as a magic concept expressing universality while masking different agendas and conflicts like trust and safety. So why shouldn't the latter be popular in AI? Because like any model, it oversimplifies participation. And for Arnstein, the latter assumes a linear ascent towards improved citizen engagement, disregarding the fluid context-dependent nature of engagement. The latter also can play to a tyranny of the majority. The loudest voices with the best resources are the ones who participate, unsurprisingly. Application of the latter does not account for the specific perniciousness of AI. For example, bots, nudgers, summarized participation, and synthetic participants. The latter assumes the importance of jurisdictions, be it city or nations. However, for many in AI sits outside jurisdictions in the realm of politics. Applications of the latter tend to emphasize the processual over the outcome. That is, get the participation process right people in a room, good facilitators, and have the participants advocate themselves for policy change. Corbett's review of ACM papers mentioning Arnstein's ladder reveals most efforts cluster at the consultation rung, which for Arnstein is tokenism, and often for policymakers in the paper that I wrote, user satisfaction around service delivery often serves as a surrogate for participation. So, political power, let's talk about it. So, what is this thing called power? Well, first of all, as mentioned in the previous session, not everyone wants to participate or they want citizen control. Also, participatory AI may not scale. Many policymakers crop the ladder. They ignore the bottom. For example, appliers focus on the positives, not the dark participation. Policymakers and people who rework the ladder also crop the top off of the ladder, that is citizen control, focusing instead on personal empowerment. The global south highlights the problem if we keep the top or if we crop the top. In the global south, citizen control can lead to citizen failure absent consent of the government or support from external NGOs. Citizens may be forced to self-manage projects with an absent state. However, if you stick with empowerment is often externally imposed. Udoewa sees empowerment largely as an act of colonization in which the developer grants empowerment to the participants. So not internally generated. So let's say we have a new rung called resist, refuse, and dissent. What that might look like is the following. So we would advocate to build a resistance rung. You need to enable citizen control of high-risk systems. This is earlier than participatory design. They need to be deciding what systems should be allowed and what should not be allowed, like immigration, social service provision, facial recognition technology and criminology, or AI industrial policy. Facilitators, policymakers, AI developers must abandon their neutral stance and act as people's advocates. You'll hear a lot of talk about AI literacy, about technology risks and harms, actually should be aimed at the people administering the latter. And I would point you to the EU's AI Acts Article 4 for a demand for AI literacy on the part of policymakers. That we need to address critiques of the latter for ignoring and homogenizing multiple publics by including the global south data enrichment workers and moderators. We should be compensating participants, and in fact, maybe we should be compensating the participants as much as we compensate the AI developers or the facilitators. So that they can actually take up the work. And finally, we should reappropriate the latter by focusing on the outcome, that is citizen power. This improves legitimacy and trust for the decisions made and improves government accountability. And that is it. Here.
Yeah, I'm just gonna try to clear this. So. How do we get this mouse?
Okay, I'll do it.
I'm trying to get this out of the way. Oh, because Ifat's. Oh, but the mouse is not working.
No.
Yes, okay, you should be good to go. It's not going away.
We have slides?
Yes, this should be there. That's it.
That's me.
Okay, I'll be your timekeeper. Okay.
And off we go. Good afternoon. I'm talking about the move from rubber stamps to roughly right in public administration. This is a project I'm planning to do with the municipality of Rotterdam. So, but I think I need first to explain why I'm talking rubber stamps and roughly right. That requires digging a bit into AI as we know it. And this is just almost random example of an AI model performing medical diagnosis. We all get the headlines that those models are more accurate than actually doctors under very certain circumstances. What researchers did is they gave actual case descriptions to an AI model, an earlier and a later version of the model, and asked the model to analyze the disease with a multiple choice test, which is usually used for in free form. All we can see is that the model reasonably performs, and performance increases with newer versions of the model in the multiple choice test. But performance is abysmal when we're looking at a free form answer. And that's what I mean with roughly right. And why is this important for my project? I'm coming from a socio-technical systems thinking background, which you all know, emerged in the mining industry in the UK in the 1950s. I used to apply that idea of socio-technical systems where the technical system is efficient, is engineered, the social system is seen as sentient, and the goal of the whole exercise is to realize quality of working life. I used this model when I was hooking up big robots to big industrial manufacturing machines in the 1990s. And yes, technical system, efficiently engineered, predictable. We're moving to the 2020s, and the technical systems are getting agentic and tend to be roughly right, which is not exactly what we're used to when we used robots 40, 50 years ago. When we look at the social system, even our thinking on people has advanced in the time that passed since the 1950s. And concepts such as in the development goals have appeared on our radar. And we're working towards what Sustainable Development Goal number 8 calls decent work. And this is the socio-technical system of AI, applying this in municipality context in Rotterdam, an aerial picture. People who can see this corner down here see where Rotterdam roughly is located in the Netherlands. You see the dark areas are housing, typically the lighter areas where it's not green, so it's either greenhouses or essentially petroleum. And the colors here, the darker the color of the neighborhood, the richer the neighborhood. And you see a lot of light colors here, so a lot of poverty. over 180 nationalities in Rotterdam. So this is a complex environment. What we've done so far, working with the city council and the administration, we gave them what's called AI literacy. We talked them through a couple of AI workshops, introduced them to prompting, introduced them to the idea of roughly right. We're now selecting pilot areas to actually look at opportunities to use AI in public administration. So this is within the municipality, 2 minutes left. Should we use AI in issuing passports or in defining building regulation, for instance? Where is it interesting? Where does it have potential? And how would we do that? We're planning to work on this in a number of workshops where we roughly go through a kind of sandboxing process, starting with the identification of opportunities and potential applications, starting with an initial conceptualization, then try to envisage a possible future administrative process supported by AI, typically using instruments like service blueprints and these kind of things. We then want to analyze that projection with a number of tools that are either available or in development, like the ELSA methodology that has been developed in the Netherlands, ethical, legal, social impact analysis. That's how AI sees this thing, trying to imagine the process. Funny thing is that imagining gets a completely new notion when you use that. That's where we are at the moment. And I guess time is up. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
So I have a couple seats up here if I want to
Just
touring a chair.
skip through that. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Ugh.
But are you using some work?
Is there?
Are you using that as well?
Yes, it's in there.
I access the maybe like the speakers for us.
Yes, sure. Of course.
Thank you.
So your slides should be in this document. I'll be your timekeeper now.
Sweet. I hope to not take 7 minutes. Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Kojo Ph.D. I am a recent master's graduate from the London School of Economics, worked with Seeta. I'm going to present my thesis, titled Truth is Change, which looks at how AI is being developed in Africa by multinational companies in particular. So, what is the problem? I tried to cut back on the context a bit because I feel like I kind of preach it to the fire. Everyone knows about the merits of AI and also the dangers of AI. So yeah, hopefully I'm not too brief, but in a nutshell, starting with the nascency of AI in Africa, I think that's created essentially a fertile ground for big tech companies who are all about the power of optimization and solving problems to go to various African countries and promise to tackle the biggest issues that are currently ongoing, from financial inclusion to healthcare to agricultural inefficiencies. And you find often that on the flip side, a lot of these countries where resources in technology haven't been developed, so you can kind of link that back to colonialism and the underdevelopment of Africa, or many African countries, that there's an impetus to want to attract these companies to the country. For example, you have Google, who are based in Accra, in Nairobi, you have IBM also in Kenya. Amazon has research centers, I think, in South Africa. Microsoft are in Kenya as well, quite big. And I'm really interested in this idea of AI as a site of power and control. And what does it mean if you have these foreign multinational companies creating these AI tools, often covertly, for African communities? And what does this mean for power and control when the local communities, when governments aren't actually in control or haven't developed these tools? What is that relationship like as well? I was trying to essentially interrogate. So who defines AI's purpose in Africa? It's key. The central research question I was looking at is this slide. Can AI tools developed by multinational research labs for African communities be liberatory? The main frameworks used in this study were critical data studies, which focuses on the impact of technology, focuses on the idea of extraction from communities in terms of data and how that impacts economic output. And then I wanted to look at this through the frame of Afrofuturism. Now, Afrofuturism, in a nutshell, centers Black experiences in relation to technology. So it addresses the idea of alienation, liberation, agency, trust, power, and resistance. So all of these concepts that pretty much we've been talking about today, but primarily through a Black lens, which I think is quite key given where the research is focusing. This is known as the Futures Code, which and I think I've included this because I think it quite neatly summarizes what Afrofuturism, the process, is in a nutshell, which is the idea of being present, connecting with the past, reflecting on the past, and using that to sketch out what possible futures can look like. And this idea that there isn't just one future that's possible when we're deciding what technology we want to exist in the world. There are many different futures, and I think having a relationship with the past, reflecting on the past, and building that sense of connection can then allow us to sketch out these different possibilities of what is possible, again, in an African context. It has its roots in larger cultural aesthetics and art. So there are many different forms of Afrofuturism and fiction, and these different movies, which again kind of play with the concept of technology and technology for liberation and what that could look like. And notably, I think Afrofuturism also navigates this idea of hope and despair existing simultaneously. And this is what I mentioned about the futures possibly existing as well when we're thinking about design. So it's a different framework essentially thinking about design. So I interviewed 8 participants, AI lab practitioners, both in grassroots labs and multinational labs. I'm not going to say which because I can't, but just know that multinational labs also included. Policy researchers and an AI startup founder who had experience at an AI lab. The 3 main core themes that came out of that study were about empowerment and representation. So again, all of the participants recognize the importance of AI being locally led, but multinational companies do have notable barriers in terms of achieving this. And I'm going to speak about that, particularly at the 3rd point. Trust and safety was a core theme. So the dangers of AI being trained on values and perspectives irrelevant to local people came up again. So if you have these multinational companies developing AI tools, to what degree are the ethics of local populations represented in that technology? And then finally, the last core theme was about the influences and impact of business, which I've been having conversations with a lot with people today, funnily enough. But essentially, there's a general skepticism that came out through the interviews about the ability of multinational labs to address digital colonialism due to their profit-driven motives. So again, if a business is fundamentally about making money and serving their shareholders, to what degree does that come in? Does that clash with more altruistic goals and more altruistic values? And even though businesses are collections of people, I think the first point here kind of essentially this idea of conflicting goals and conflicting objectives comes into question. So these are some quotes I pulled out as well from the actual study. I think the third box is quite interesting, and so in case you can't see it at the back, but it's a quote, the first one from the one of the grassroots lab practitioners I interviewed, which says that their work benefits the community because they mostly open source it. They're really leading with this idea of trying to disseminate their research to the community. And the second quote is from a AI lab practitioner at a multinational company talking about how they can't open source their work because it's conflicting with the legal side of their business and again, it's sort of proprietary concerns, which have also been mentioned today. So what now? starting with the premise that there will be Black people in the future. I think it's important to recognize that. So we have to actually build these systems with that in mind. But it does call into question that the role of big tech in Africa and what power dynamics are at play. And what is possible given the legacy of colonialism. I think efforts should be made to shift power balance between multinational labs and communities, but also grassroots groups. And I think that's come up in some of the talks I've heard today as well. And then thinking, is there scope for big tech to work harmoniously with grassroots organizations? I think as well, like I'm not here with the perspective of big tech is bad, but we need to understand that the limitations of these companies do exist. And then what does that now mean for how we move forward? And yeah, this paper will evolve in time. This is the starting point. I'm going to, there's going to be future iterations of it. I would like to focus more on East Africa specifically and draw those experiences out in depth. It's just a general macro snapshot. And that's me.
Great. Now we will have a presentation from Ifat, which will be remote. Thank you, Ifat, for managing under very challenging circumstances involving flight delays and inclement weather. So there are no slides, so you have to put your listening cap on very tightly.
I want to know if she can share her video.
Yeah, I'm trying to allow her to do that now. Supposedly, yes. Go ahead and give it a try.
I did. It's not working.
Oh no, I don't know why.
Do you want to get started and then maybe we can try and see if we can get the.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Sounds good.
And welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the introduction. Incredible presentation so far. I'm so glad to be here. The title of my today's presentation is Digital Erasure and Algorithmic Governance, Participation, Power, and Resistance in Authoritarian Contexts. It's an honor, honestly, to be here today to discuss a topic that's both urgent and deeply unsettling, the weaponization of digital infrastructures to silence dissent and reshape reality. We often assume that digital platforms provide space for free expression, yet in authoritarian contexts, they are increasingly used as tools of control, where entire communities are erased and reality itself is rewritten. The central question I pose today is this: how do states use digital platforms, not just to silence resistance, but to construct deceptive digital realities that serve their political agendas? Yeah, I tried the video, it's not working.
Still.
Yeah, a key concept in my research is digital Potemkin villages, which are carefully crafted online facades that obscure the reality of systemic violence. The term comes from an 18th century Russian legend where a minister, Grigory Potemkin, allegedly built fake villages to impress Catherine the Great, hiding the true conditions of poverty and unrest. Today, governments do something eerily similar, but now they use social media influencers, algorithmic amplification, and content moderation policies to manufacture illusions of normalcy. In East Turkestan, for example, Chinese state-affiliated influencers post vibrant videos showcasing Uyghur food, dance, and festivities. By the way, Uyghur people are the people of East Turkestan, also in the popular language called as Xinjiang, but my East Turkestan friends find it very derogatory, so I completely avoid to use the term Xinjiang. So in East Turkestan, like I said, the Chinese affiliated influencers, they post these vibrant videos showcasing the Uyghur food, the culture, the dance, festivals. But what is the intent? The intent is to project an image of cultural celebration while concealing forced assimilation, mass surveillance, and the ongoing repression of Uyghur identity. These influencers present an aestheticized version of life under Chinese rule, while Uyghur activists who attempt to counter these narratives find their content removed, shadow banned, or algorithmically suppressed. A similar pattern unfolds in occupied Palestine, where Israeli influencers portray an image of peaceful coexistence, while Palestinian voices documenting military occupation and settler violence are systematically silenced through geofencing, content takedowns, and shadow banning. What we see here is not just censorship, but replacement. The voices of the oppressed are erased and substituted with state-approved content that reshapes global perceptions in favor of authoritarian regimes. But how do these deceptive narratives dominate online spaces? The answer lies in platform governance and algorithmic bias. Social media platforms are not neutral. They reward engagement and political convenience over truth. Content that's aesthetic, apolitical, or state-sanctioned gets algorithmic boosts, while posts exposing human rights violations are buried or removed under vague policies of misinformation or community guidelines violations. For example, Palestinian activists have documented how Instagram and Facebook automatically flag and remove content that uses Arabic terms like martyr, even when used in neutral or historical contexts. The same pattern exists in China's digital ecosystem. On platforms like Douyin, which is like Chinese TikTok, WeChat, and Weibo, posts that expose the reality of Uyghur activists. Sorry, I get distracted by the chat. So the same pattern exists in China's digital ecosystem. On their platforms, Douyin, TikTok, WeChat, Weibo, posts that expose the reality of Uyghur repression are deleted almost instantly, while state propaganda thrives. If an Uyghur activist posts a photo of or any information about a missing family member, their content disappears. But if an influencer posts about Uyghur cultural revival, it gains millions of views. This raises a critical question. What happens when digital platforms, originally meant for free speech, become complicit in state repression? To understand this, we need to examine the political economy of digital platforms. Companies like Meta, Google are not just passive intermediaries. They are active participants in shaping digital realities. And as Shoshana Zuboff argues in The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, platforms prioritize profit and political stability over human rights. Take TikTok for instance. Its parent company ByteDance operates under China's strict censorship laws, ensuring that politically sensitive content is removed within seconds. Meanwhile, Western platforms like Meta and YouTube enforce content moderation policies that disproportionately silence Palestinian, Uyghur, and other dissident voices, aligning with state interests either for market access or political pressure. The result, a digital landscape where entire histories and struggles are erased, sanitized, and rewritten to serve state narratives. Am I out of time already?
No, you should have a couple minutes left. Yeah.
Okay. So despite these oppressive structures, resistance persists. Dissidents, activists, and journalists are developing creative ways to counter digital erasure. One being archiving erased content. For example, organizations like Hamle, the Arab Center for Social Media and Advancement, they document censored Palestinian posts, building independent archives of human rights violations. Second is decentralized platforms. So some activists are shifting to encrypted messaging apps or decentralized social media platforms like Mastodon to share uncensored information. And third is digital literacy strategies. Uyghur and Palestinian activists use coded language, alternative spellings, and visual storytelling to evade algorithmic suppression. However, these grassroots efforts can only go so far. The real burden of accountability lies within the tech corporations. As researchers, policymakers, and digital citizens, we must demand greater transparency and ethical governance from tech platforms. Platforms must disclose how their recommendation systems work and what biases they reinforce. Community guidelines should be independently audited to ensure they do not disproportionately target marginalized groups. And instead of amplifying state-sponsored propaganda, platforms must create safeguards to protect activists from digital repression. The stakes are too high for inaction. If we do nothing, the digital public sphere will continue to be a space of erasure rather than empowerment, of deception rather than dissent. As I conclude, I want to leave you with this thought. The internet was once imagined as a space of liberation, but today it's being repurposed as a tool of control. The question is, who will shape the digital narratives of tomorrow? Will we allow states and corporations to dictate what history looks like, or will we fight to reclaim our voices and truths? Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Ifat. If you could imagine about 45 people in the room right now, we have some standing room, just so you have a sense of what the collection of us, what your audience is looking like. So thank you to all for speakers and their co-authors. We're going to move into question and answer now. And before we do that, sort of analogous to how some of the other sessions have been structured, I want us to just take some time to have some interpersonal discussion, preferably with somebody you don't know. So take a minute to, as you're thinking about what questions you'd like to pose to our presenters, I would like you to turn to your neighbor or neighbors. Could be group of two, could be group of 2 or 3. And I want you to think of 2 questions, because we have sort of traversed quite a large distance, both geographically, normatively, methodologically, and also from the perspective of practice and epistemic practices and community practices. We've traveled quite a long distance. So I want you to think about what are some of the similarities, differences, and surprises that you can identify across these 4 presentations. First part of the question. And then the second part of the question is, what do these similarities, differences, and surprises suggest for how we ought to do things differently? And obviously, in the last presentation, we had a few suggestions, but I want you to think about that, how we ought to be doing things differently, whether that's in the world of practice and policymaking or in research. So we'll take 5 minutes, find a partner or 2 partners, and discuss.
Yes. I've got multiple.
see if there's
Repeat that
anyone,
one more time?
if anyone from online, if we could start with online, because again, we have two, we have co-presenter and Ifat, single presenter, online. If we could have anyone from the online audience to share their observations, and then we'll go to the room.
I mean, Dan and Keto had questions.
Great, but any quick responses to the question that I prompted you with first? Do they want to respond to that? Sorry, I'm not.
I don't know, you can ask.
I'm asking. Can you hear us online, folks? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Oh. Ifat, did you just, yes, okay, they can hear us, I think.
Okay, does anybody online want to respond to the question that I posed to you before we get into the pre-associating part of the Q&A?
Hi, I mean, I can respond to the similarities. I didn't get to thinking about.
Great.
It's Keto speaking. Hi, everyone. Lovely to see you all. Hi, Claudia, and hi, Gwen. Sorry, they're my former classmates. I think the similarities for me are that they're all questioning power and how to redistribute that power. And they also do not assume that one institution, group, or person has the answer to how to redistribute this power. So there's a lot of talk about democracy. There's a lot of talk about including different stakeholders. And Kojo spoke about talking to different people. So that is for me what I know. What are the similarities that I noticed. I did not get to the other part of the question, but someone else can probably get in there.
Maybe we can turn to the room for an additional share back or response to the two-part question, especially addressing hopefully the second part of the question, which is perhaps a little bit more difficult to answer. So any quick responses to the fronts from the room? Yes, sorry, I'll come back to this.
Yeah, really want to go first, but we kind of reflected, I think, a little bit as the online speaker did. And kind of the conclusion we kind of came to. So just to explain the context, we're both from kind of activist organisations. So we're meeting the academic bubble, and the academic bubble can feel a bit passive to us. Just to be being really polite and respectful, it's like, yeah, well, what we're going to do about it. And I think our question back to the room is, maybe it's my question. I'm really desperate to hear about successful, small or large, on the ground acts of resistance that have affected AI developers or deployers. Really quite desperate for that. So I would like to really hear about that. If anybody around the room has any of those examples, please, let's hear them.
I have two. One is that we in Canada, as I mentioned earlier, were able to shut down the industrial AI policy period. So we killed it. And it was because of the lack of public consultation. Second of all, there is this dude in the state of Washington in the US who used facial recognition technology to identify police officers who weren't wearing their badges.
Right? Okay, so we have sort of institutional level, and then also sort of individually led forms of successful resistance. I think we had two, and then can we add a third one? You were behind, I think you also had your hand. No, okay, so these two.
No, yeah, we were talking about these examples of practice, and you were saying there's nothing, what does academia want to maybe contribute to the discussion? So I was part of doing the research that was presented from Namibia this morning, and I think that what we need is examples of processes where we engage ourselves on the ground and say, what happens when we start looking at and engaging with communities and co-designing for them. What kind of questions does that reflect back to ourselves? What do they actually want? How does it become relevant for them? And what do we do with this information, right? I mean, how do we work more from a bottom-up perspective or from other people's perspectives, like we saw in the decolonial discussion also presented here. I mean, there will be Black people in the future, I'm sure. So, and all sorts of other people. So how do we engage with them? And how do we do that long-term from a bottom-up perspective and not so much maybe from what kind of policies and guidelines should these processes have? So I think that's a contribution that academia can make, maybe because they're not bound by business models and things like that.
Debatable point, but.
With the stand.
All right, keep it lively. So, yes, thank you. So, so I'm Susie from Care International, and I co-presented the research this morning on AI and global South inclusion. And I think it like in Kojo's presentation, brilliant, and Ifat's and so on, we were hearing about, there's a fundamental issue here. There's the tension between for-profit companies. It's generally for-profit companies who are building AI systems, and it's not for profit with citizens who are either users of AI or subjects of AI, etc. So how do we kind of navigate that? And in terms of the, I think I look at how do you influence the development of AI and the governance of AI, and I kind of see it as an ecosystem, right? And there absolutely has to be activists who will go all out and bang, 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 will say things that not everybody can say. And then I also think there's really huge scope as well to engage with people within big technology organizations, right? Because organizations are not monoliths, they're made up of individuals, and there are many passionate, very decent human beings within big tech multinationals who also want to do the right thing. This is different to other technologies. This is utterly societally game-changing. And I think most people think, I want to look back and think I was on the right side of the fence here. And so I do personally believe in really building those allies and helping them influence from within. And of course, I would say that because, but I chose to go after Accenture to do that because they have an influence over clients, and hopefully, my project colleagues here, that will make a difference to some people who are building AI systems to think twice about how it's done. Great, thank you. Okay, Dan McQuillan is just, thank you, first of all, sorry, it's a bit driving two cars at the same time. Wants to add that we need more than nonprofit AI. We need a framework for establishing the common good in relation to tech, such as Ivan Illich's ideas of convivial tools. AI itself would not pass these tests. I'll let you sit with that. And then it's your turn.
Thank you very much. My name is Jose Renato. Two thoughts maybe regarding ways of tackling this that I see from civil society, especially in Brazil, where I come from. So I would say, first of all, an example of a decree that was drafted within Bolsonaro's government on data governance within the public sector, and this case was brought mostly because of civil society contestation to the Supreme Court, and it was reformed. So I think it was a great example of how civil society managed to tackle this. It was a very problematic debate in terms of access between different organizations within the government, between bodies to data. So it will be mostly a free flow of data. And the second example that I would say is what's happening, mostly driven by the homeless workers movement in Brazil, in terms of digital sovereignty, how they're thinking digital infrastructures for the workers, so delivery services, and also for the provision of services fixing stuff in someone's place, especially for the activists who are unemployed. And so this was the means that they had to not need to depend on infrastructures provided by Uber or other systems. Just a brief comment. I am a bit skeptical of how much individuals in these organizations can really shape something. someone who like how have been having contact with them for a while, but I'm curious like to hear about the results that you guys eventually have over there.
Can we hold that thought for a second? Because I do actually want to bring in our presenter, starting with Ifat, just in case you have something to respond. We seem to have normally gravitated to Q&A, but I just wanted the co-presenters a chance to dig in. So in no order whatsoever. Ifat. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. I didn't get the name of the person who was speaking before this, but when you said something like, activists can say what other people cannot, trust me, they cannot. My entire dissertation is about Erasure, a taxonomy of digital erasure, and that's exactly what I study, how activists are not allowed to say what they want to say and how they want to say it. So there's a lot of censorship, lot of surveillance. As a dissident myself, it will literally take us one whole day to even talk about what I have been through and how big tech has oppressed me personally. But I want to answer one thing. You said, yeah, there are many passionate people in these platforms, maybe who want to do good, and that's why there are so many whistleblowers from time to time. But honestly, I personally don't know how to engage. Just last week, I got an email from Meta, and they said they read my research about a proactive blocking tool that I wrote about last year, and they said they want to improve something and want to talk to me, but off the record, which really triggered me. I was like, if you read my paper, you want my insight, like, why do you want it to be off, like, off the record? I think the biggest problem with big tech is it's so far removed from reality. Like they try to create these algorithms, rules, and regulations on their platform for minority communities without even engaging people from my community. So that's something like I have really struggled with. I mean, I was 16 years old when internet finally became mainstream in Kashmir because, of course, like it's also a conflict zone. And I didn't have access to internet like my other people who are 32 right now. They started maybe using internet when they were 10 years old. But ever since internet was introduced in Kashmir, it was not just a tool of liberation for people like me who thought, oh my God, finally we have a voice, we can connect to the world. But it was a very ugly tool of control that came with like internet bans, internet shutdowns, and anything you write on Facebook, next thing you know, you end up in a police station. So I don't know. I think big tech really needs to do a lot of work, starting with really engaging people from minority communities and then trying to fix what's wrong with them. They can't do it by being so distant.
Great. Thank you so much. Kojo.
Yeah, just to the point recently about the examples. I think in African context, anyways, like one major example that popped into my head, or not so much as resistance to what's going on, but more of an alternative perspective, is there's a grassroots group by the name of Masakane, who organized, I guess, but again, self-organized group of African developers from across the continent, across the world, really, who are contributing to this open source research, and on the ground you find researchers, because those are two people who go into communities that they are already a part of in those countries and can do great work in sharing some of that research. But I think for an African perspective, like for other African developers, I think one tension that come across in this context is this idea of if you're contributing to the open source because there is a dearth of research, then how do you then navigate the tension of big tech companies coming in and taking that open source research and then building tools with it, because they develop these tools that, again, don't censor those communities. We're going back to the extraction kind of principle. And there's there's a tension in also, should researchers be responsible for developing data sets that they're not being paid for? Like how do we navigate that? And this kind of comes into the question of like licensing. And there are initiatives which are sprouting up all over the place about like how local communities can license their data. So then they're also seeing a benefit from them, and they're making the choice to license and refuse to share their data on their own terms. But yeah, it's a pretty messy environment at the moment. And just on the idea of engagement, because I briefly mentioned this, I didn't get a chance to delve into much depth, but one of the barriers that the multinational companies have in terms of engaging with communities isn't just the logistical barriers of being unable to kind of travel to rural areas sometimes. Like I had one researcher say, like, I got to travel 8 hours to go and get one response from this community that might not be useful, probably not. But then even cultural barriers as well of like the organization has already decided what type of AI tools it wants to build. It's kind of going to these local communities to consult. So it's going again top down to bottom up. Now, what happens if the community says we don't want this tool? Whether the politics of refusal come into play with this, and can they actually say no? Again, really, really murky, but I think people position of it.
Could I just pick up on one aspect here? I'm coming from the humanitarian sector and a little bit like Susie, looking at some really skewed power dynamics and incentives, which have all been upended again in the last month by USA being disappeared unilaterally. But there is a history of the humanitarian aid communities also contributing to large-scale extractivism, and those communities that are affected by conflict and crises being trapped in a data for aid paradigm, and we've sort of accidentally moved into this. And now with the sort of shift in what data means in the data economy, nobody's gone back and rethought the sort of morality of this deal that we've set up, and we're in a really bizarre predicament where you have the likes of UNICEF or others making, or WFP deals with Palantir or whoever else it is, but there isn't much examination of these shifts to add that to the research agenda. And if anyone's interested in working with me on that, please find me.
Can you say again who made deals with Palantir?
WFP, and it's in public domain. There's an IRC with OpenAI.
Plus one, our colleague over there, Luciana and I, some separate organizations, we work with AI for D, now AI for D2, which is IDRC, and now it's the FCDO. Sorry for all the alphabets too. But we work on a kind of daily basis with African developers, AI developers, community based. We do the gender support for the AI developers, and so Vasikani, of course, has been in the forefront of developing actually low resource languages, as you well know. Yeah, I'm not telling. But it's their ability to work with like smaller data sets has also kind of jump-started the northern understanding of small language models that we're going to be going to. So this is an innovation that came from Africa that's actually going to really wind up being global, and they're going to be leaders. There's deep learning and DABA. Because I'm an activist, I just want to say that there are all these very, very powerful, brilliant people working in Africa, but in Latin America and elsewhere that are already doing this work. And I kind of feel that everybody should just find those communities that wants to work with them and start there, and then start working from what's the problem that you're trying to solve, and how can maybe we can or we cannot help you solve it, but where's our expertise going to be even of any use at all? So we have a community methodology, which is, first of all, when you it's like duh for social scientists, but like define an objective, and then what's the team that you need for that objective, which would include the community who you're solving the problem for. And just the last thing, we also have two things: a feminist AI research network that's been going on for the last 4 or 5 years that only makes AI from a feminist point of view for communities. And for those of you going to AI Action Summit, there are several of those projects that have been picked to be profiled there. And we also have a community called AI Inequality that has 500 researchers from 57 countries to have these conversations, so you can find colleagues from Brazil, from Nigeria, from Berkeley together who can solve those problems. So I think that we should be looking at what exists and how to build on it instead of just describing what's wrong, and maybe not participate in big tech and just be doing stuff.
Great. So we have a few comments from the Zoom. One is for a resource called the AI Manifesto, Manifesto on Algorithmic Humanitarianism, written in 2018, that might sort of complement. So again, it's the Manifesto on Algorithmic Humanitarianism that might complement and move along some of the ideas that have been expressed in the room. We have a question in the back.
Oh, just to add to the resources, there's also Techno-Colonialism, What Technology for Good is Harmful by Mirka Mariano that came out recently. So
Great, and I think that's probably sort of direct answer to sort of questioning now that practitioners find themselves in these maybe unsavory partnerships. Yeah, to sort of pick that apart. Okay, so yes, Renee, and then Kito. Sorry, can I switch to Kito
Yes,
and
please.
then come back to Renee?
Yep. Kito, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I was just going to respond to the question on examples of resistance, like the resistance of AI. And I think we have to think about resistance as happening on a spectrum. I think many people have alluded to that. And just maybe some examples, I can't mention who, but for instance, in the African context, I have a lot of colleagues who are questioning, do African countries really need to invest limited resources on developing AI policies when, for instance, there are no consumer protection bills or laws. There are no laws protecting workers, especially gig workers. I think gig workers are always thrown at us as like, you know, that's for economically empowering. But as we've seen from workers from Meta who were OpenAI who were annotating data, that they are working under very hard conditions. So those are, you know, examples of people who are resisting in terms of like policy. Do we need a policy for AI specifically, or do we need, for instance, a digital strategy? Do we need, for instance, I think the term that is used is a fourth industrial revolution strategy that encompasses all sectors and looks at all these other like real material conditions, situations such as labor rights, exploitation, extraction of data, and so forth. I think the other one also, which is very important, is that this contention between state and like these need and this presenting this idea of economic development. The South African government has allowed Amazon to build its headquarters in Cape Town on ancestral indigenous land. The argument for them was that it is providing jobs and empowering South Africans. Amazon has some requirements that allow them to employ people of specific races. For instance, people who speak German in their call centers. It's very, you know, this argument of, you know, having, allowing big tech companies to do as they please in our countries in the name of economic development is also a way of resisting. And these are also like ways that we have seen communities. I mean, in Cape Town, that movement is small, but it's quite powerful. They've been very persistent, and we don't hear about that in these spaces. We don't hear about it when our leaders go to these big UN conferences at the AI summit. They don't talk about these small movements where people are contesting. Instead, we are told over and over and over again that it's for economic development, and that economic development is the size of a pea, a green pea or something. So I think the examples are there, but they're very small, and maybe it's also like, I mean, this is also why we have this track that in showing resistance, whether it's small or not, we see that there is a revolution that is ongoing, but there's also like the resistance from the other, you know, the bad quote unquote resistance is counter to this revolution that people who are less powerful are driving. Yeah, so that's just what I wanted to add.
It isn't clear, Kito is one of the co-organizers of this panel with Renee. And yeah, just Kito, I'll just kind of underscore what you said, right? So that we have, I mean, it would be really interesting now that we've already sort of started this conversation to actually map, for example, at different levels, what are the different forms of resistance that are already in practice? Who do they actually involve? And what kind of resources do they have to continue their momentum? I'll just put that out there, Renee.
So, 2 points. One is that local governments and subnational governments around the world, and even national governments, are being misled as to the need for AI. So they're being forced into a panicky response to an arms race. And I think we can do a lot to provide a counter narrative to that, and maybe to help CSOs work with their governments to provide that counter narrative, because perhaps they simply do not need AI of any kind, because any cooperation with big tech ultimately is going to be about data harvesting. So we need to resist that. And second of all, I've been working in participatory theory for a very long time. And I think we senior professors have a moral and ethical obligation to do advocacy on behalf of the people we work. We should no longer be just sitting there saying, we're here to facilitate, do procedural fairness and all. We actually have to get off our butts and go to policymakers and say, stop doing X.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to come in just to make a comment that, I mean, all these examples of resistance are excellent. I do it's difficult, right? Because these for-profit companies have tremendous synergy with governments, particularly through lobbying, particularly in the global north, but ultimately they are separate entities. And a lot of the examples of resistance we've been given are actually resistance towards governments implementing policies on behalf of big tech, as opposed to actually resisting big tech itself, which I do wonder if there is work to be done, particularly in countries in the global north, to try to decouple or to try to break up this relationship between big tech and governments. And I also just kind of wanted to note that, yes, I just wanted to second your point, especially about really pushing back on sort of local governments, subnational and national governments all being misled. Working in the UK, there's a huge thing on growth at the moment. I don't deny that there are some benefits that AI could bring to the UK, but I don't believe that this sort of focus on if you build it, they will come type thing is necessarily beneficial to communities or even at scale, really, to the economy. I'll stop there. I could keep going.
Figure out an alternative growth strategy for Rachel Reeves.
Yeah.
That's the research I'm doing, though.
Sorry, do you want to say that a bit louder?
So he just needs to figure out an alternative growth strategy for the UK. And I'm pretty sure he can ditch it tomorrow. Yeah.
Great, actually, so that actually puts that comment, I think, directly in conversation with Susie? Yeah. Yes, with what Susie was saying earlier. Just in terms of choices to be made about how you work with people inside industry or how you in fact go into industry. And so, we can explore that a bit more, but for now, this question.
I just want to pick up on the economy part. So Claudia and I were talking about perhaps having participation target the economy itself. So again, how will companies listen? We boycott them. They're going to listen to money, and we don't talk about money enough because of thunder dynamics and all of that, but that keeps getting that's the norm we have, but we need to start talking about money. And Renee mentioned compensating participants in these projects, but also just talking about why is an AI developer worth a certain amount economically. And I think beyond socio-technical systems, they cannot be themselves without socioeconomic systems and economic systems. So bringing in the economy to participation so it doesn't keep getting sidelined from the main conversation. Claudia was talking about being at this event yesterday and the day before, and the companies were there. They're like, AI on steroids are going to roll it out, and we're not here to stop them, even in individual groups. But as soon as we stop individually, first their things, but also collectively doing it, and I mentioned that we'll build it earlier, which is both actually the merriment of tech and companies and government, because it was really from Google and Google's Project Maven and Project Nimbus that the workers resisted. So again, I think just doing more of that, boycott Amazon.ca is happening in Quebec and Canada right now. Now we see the whole tariff wars back across the ocean, and then that's an opportunity to finally do BDS, because if we didn't want to do it for Palestine, maybe we want to do it in, for Canada or whatever, right? So I'm just being a bit snarky, but I think the boycotting part is really
interesting. Okay, that raises quite a few questions. I just want to summarize, if I can. So maybe contrasted to participation in the AI lifecycle or even participatory governance. Actually, maybe we should have participation in the economy, and that would go a bit further than what we currently have, both in this event and in the discourse more broadly. I would just kind of echo what we started with in this discussion, which is, do we have examples of that? So maybe something to come back to, but yeah, here, and then somebody over here. Maybe just here.
Just a quick point of contention, not so much contention, but just like in terms of if we navigating the idea of like more feasible. But again, thinking about the African context, how Eddie actually just kind of speaks to you when you were just taking on the more big tech and governments, but how when you don't have, say, like internet infrastructure, and then Google comes in, hey, we're going to build, an internet cable for you. The government's going to say yes, because we don't have resources to do that. So then now, as a citizen, what element of refusal do you now have to Google surveillance, because your internet is now going to cable? So it's a bit on an individual level. Sure, you can say, I'm not going to use you first, but fundamentally, like the decision is being made for you at a higher level. So it's almost like, how do you now work with governments or armed governments so that they can make the decision to not, either to develop the infrastructure themselves or to work, alternatively to those. But there are, I guess, various levels of resistance that we also need to tackle, or equality we also need to tackle. Looking at the idea of choice, like how much choice.
But surely you're not hopeless.
You have to be optimistic, but there's still your constraints. I think has come up. You're dealing with limited constraints.
Here, then in the back, and then new question.
Yeah, I just wanted to link to the resistance and the need to local governance to feel like we need to use digitalization and how we can combat that. I was working at TNO, like in the Netherlands, now here in Strasbourg, and we were requested as an institute, okay, we have so many tests to make our AI better, to make it trustworthy. And then they asked us, can you give us a certificate? And to combat that, we said, no, we won't, we can't. Also, can't. And then we said, instead of trustworthy AI, we are willing to work together with you to learn together to go to trustworthy decisioning. The AI will not be trustworthy, it's about decisioning. We said, we're not willing to just do a technical project. We're willing to do not a how to make AI better, but to learn together. How can we make a decision process if AI is here? Like, we understand there is going to be this pressure to say, like, just don't do it. Governments didn't want to hear that. So we thought, okay, how can we learn together to make it an if question, a framing of if we want to use AI? And then we said, we're not going to spend 80% of the money on some developers and trying to check the code. We're going to do most of the money on interviews, understanding the question. Because in these two public bodies that we had done, where I was in the end, it was, for example, one about fraud detection. They wanted to combat the fraud in the municipality. This is public knowledge. I'm checking what I can share. And in the end, it was more a question, okay, there's a lot of people who are being marked as fraudulent, or they just didn't understand the rules of the welfare anymore. And if we just tackle them during the interviews, we thought we just make the welfare more understandable and more simple. Then there's less fraud. So this whole scary thing that everyone is just frauding the social welfare, that could be tackled there, not in making a better AI that's bias free, and then detecting it in the right way. And really, we learned that at least really calling in a safe space for the public body to learn keep a safe space in the team, but also safe for the government, for the citizens, because we didn't do let's implement it and see if it works, and let's do a safe space. That was a local resistance trying to create a safe space for them to learn that framed the question to a further than I thought.
Right. Yeah. Can you just say the name of the project again?
Oh yes, I'm Stephen. I was at TNO and it was the AI oversight.
Great. So nice response to coercive computational infrastructures to think about trustworthy decision making. I have 4 questions. Can I just take them all in a row? So first 1, 2, 3, and then 4. And we'll take those, and then I'm going to let our co-presenters reply.
Sorry, mine's not so much a question, but rather a reflection on many of the things that have been said. Is that right?
That's fine. Within time reasons.
Right. Okay, 2 parts in 2 points. The first one is, it is actually a question, but is AI not a red herring or an eclipse in the conversation that we're having right now? talking about big tech and economic infrastructure and so on, ultimately it's the conflation of public and private interest at massive scale. Should we be talking about AI specifically in this, or again, should we be resisting something else somewhere else on a different plane? To the point on resistance, then, I like the idea of this indeed being a continuum. One thing that I think I heard is so between going from resisting to big tech. So again, this sort of economic, like massive scale economic resistance and so on, to resisting the deployment of the tech. So indeed, in sovereign nations, should we be just blindly accepting that we should all have the same technological futures? All the way down to, and I think if I captured or if I understood it correctly, Ifat's in Ifat's presentation, something really caught my attention on the effects of tech and how it's shaping interactions, trustworthiness, and so on of information. So the very specific point on if someone from the Uyghur community posts something, it will be removed. If an influencer posts something on the Uyghur community, it will be overinflated by the algorithms. So that's not, I mean, that is an effect of AI. But it creates a new reality also of how we relate to information, how we consume information, and so on. And so it's not, again, back to AI being made somewhat of an eclipse here. These are social dynamics as well that are beyond just the tech.
Excellent. The typer, sure.
Hi. So just a reflection a little bit on ways forward. So far we've heard a lot about participation and governance when it comes to sort of like deliberative processes that are held in collaboration with other government or big tech. And I think there is another avenue, which is when you do it together with the civil society, right? To provide civil society organizations with the democratic legitimacy to then fight on behalf of change effects. So I don't have an example from the AI field, but when it comes to climate change, for example, in the UK, WWF and RSPB run citizens' assemblies, climate assemblies, and they created the People's Plan for Nature. And that gave them democratic legitimacy to then start sort of like broader campaigns around climate change. Like, I'm not sure whether it's a successful example, but I think it's worth thinking of deliberation as a tool for advocacy as well, where all these campaigns can actually come out of.
Yes. Hi, I'm Renee. I found the diverse points very interesting, but I kept wondering that within the whole AI conversations, right? Sorry, okay, I just feel like something. Anyway, within the whole AI conversation, it's also the fact that people might be left behind. No one wants to be left behind. The correlations are that during the time the camera was invented, people resisted it and lost their jobs. Nobody basically wants to be left behind, right? So I think that's then when you're telling people or people to divest and boycott from the economic police, there's also the part where people also feel like kind of the fear of missing out, when you're constantly the rhetoric around why we should all jump onto the AI hype is that, oh, lest you be left behind, because then you're out of the job and nobody wants to be that right now. So how do you boycott the thing where you might lose your livelihood or you might feel like you are a dinosaur eventually because you were resistant to it?
Okay. About to interject, but I'm going to hold my tongue. If you could ask your question quickly, and then I'm going to ask Ifat first to go, then Peter, because we haven't heard from Peter in this Q&A, and then our other co-presenters, Pamela, Renee, and Kojo.
Thank you. It's quite related. My own research, I did covered ethnography working as a gig worker, just for research for 3 months. But in the process, I met people, resistance as gig workers while they are there. And there are multiple examples. One is in India, delivery boy Twitter account. It's, you can look at that. And there's also similarly some source and the whistleblowing around that in Kenya. which kind of raises a similar point. Boycott is fine, you know, with context, but within the context, how do we protect these resistances? What is our role in doing that? Because it is easy to boycott when you have the privilege of boycotting. It's not possible within the context. And I've seen that and I've struggled to even write about it because there's not enough context sometimes for me to understand how do we approach that as researchers, you know, all the other people that represent here.
Great. Sounds like beginnings of a strategy plan for some interesting and exciting collaborations. Peter, Renee, and Pamela. Sorry, we'll start with Ifat, then Peter, Renee, and Kojo. Okay. Ifat, any concluding thoughts?
Nothing. I just think it was a great workshop overall, and would have been great if I was there in person. These conversations just need to happen. As somebody said, you know, we have to do more. We have to literally like walk up to these people and ask them. Sometimes we say, oh, what I'm doing is not making any sense. It's not enough, so we shouldn't do. So I would say we all should do what we can in our capacity, and honestly, never like stop asking questions, even if it makes people around us uncomfortable. That's what I would say, and hopefully some of us can like continue this conversation beyond this workshop also. And sorry about the noise, like you all know, I'm at the airport standing between flights.
Great, thank you so much, Ifat. Peter.
Right. I think I'm going to reflect on technology and using your example where you said, let's look at the whole environment where we're acting in and how we interact with that technology. This is very easy when you come from a TNO perspective, where you know the technology. And the same holds for resisting technology. I believe that I need to know much more of and about technology and get my hands dirty with technology to be able to resist technology. Which is kind of, you know, the old hacker mentality. Get those machines, take them apart, put them back together, know how to break them in a meaningful act of resistance. And I would love governments and people working in governments adopting this attitude. Taking those big tech machines and not let the Accentures of this world tell them you need to use them, asking for an example of resistance. We told our city council to not use this algorithm for a similar one that you were talking about. Accenture said, you need to use it because it will save you money. And they were not listening to the academics, they were listening to Accenture. If they would have gotten their hands dirty with the machine, they probably would have listened to us.
Great. Thank you. Kojo.
Quickly.
Please, like 2 words.
Yeah. Thank you. But just quickly, the policy point stands out to me. Sorry, let me backtrack. The idea of resistance and the idea of not every problem requires a technological solution. I think everyone kind of recognizes that, but sometimes I think the reason why the technological solution can win out is because it's a solution. And I think unless we're working like kind of sectorally, where when you recognize that technology might not be the answer to this problem, or community said technology is not the answer to this issue, then who do you now get involved to actually solve it? Because sometimes you require policy, but then you have to involve policymakers, and that's a messy process. It's complex. You have to build capacity, and again, technology is quick. It was quicker and it's easier. So I think there's what has come out to me, anyways, is the importance of working kind of cross sectorally. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
I actually do work on natural language processing. I've worked with LLMs, not as an end user, but as a developer as well. AI is not a dual use neutral technology. AI is intrinsically biased. It does not add as an innovation to shared prosperity. So I will not buy the argument that AI is neutral and only in its application it is good or bad. And I think that we need to find ways, and maybe it's on me, in the global north to figure out how to break it more often.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ifat, Pamela, Kito, and all of our online participants. Thank you to all of you in the room. Hopefully we'll converse with one another in these informal moments. And yes, till the next.